Hello, this is a brief video to show how to fit a new steam valve or a Shades of Coffee steam valve to a Gaggia Classic. This machine's lightly modified, so excuse some of the additional wires and pipes and things that are all over the place within this machine. But the main parts of interest today are the steam valve, the knob, and obviously the steam wand that's coming off it. So what we're going to show is a few quick hints and tips on how to remove the original valve, because sometimes it can be a little bit tricky, and how to replace that with the Shades of Coffee valve and what to do about it. So the first thing we'd recommend is to get together a few quick tools, a large flat bladed screwdriver. This helps, along with perhaps a smaller one as well. This helps in levering off the original valve, because they can be a little bit tricky to get off at times. A suitable Allen key hex drive for getting onto those bolts there. So they are 5mm hex head nuts, bolts, screws, and an adjustable wrench or adjustable spanner. And this is for getting onto the nut on the steam wand. So you don't need many tools, but having the right ones certainly can help, particularly when it comes to removing the valve, because removing the valve on machines where the valve's been there for quite a long time, they tend to get stuck on with scale and they can be quite tricky to remove. So the first thing we'd recommend, just to make life a little bit easier, is to just very carefully unbolt the steam wand. So using your wrench, just crack the steam wand nut on there very carefully, just to undo it, so that it makes it a little bit easier to undo when we get a little bit further down the process. So just loosen it. You should find that once you've turned it about one turn, you can probably turn it up, loosen it by hand anyway, but we'll do that a little bit later. So remove it probably about a turn, just to take the initial pressure off the steam wand nut. Always good then to take the steam knob off. So this has got one of our lovely olive knobs on it, so these will just pull off. If you've got a different aftermarket knob, you may find that you've got some sort of ugly screw or some other way of fixing it on there, but our knobs and the standard knobs just pull straight off, so you can pull that straight off. There's a black plastic splash or protection guard on there, and we'll remove that shortly, but for the time being that can stay on. So what we need to do next is just loosen these two bolts on the top of the boiler that hold the steam valve onto the boiler. Again, these can be really quite tricky to remove, so it can take some force, and actually using the hex tool in that orientation can make life a little bit easier when you're initially just cracking those bolts just to remove them. So what we have to do is exert a reasonable amount of force just to get those to crack initially. So that's that one done, and this one is similar. So you can undo those bolts completely, remove those bolts, and we'll be using those again in a short while. So we'll take those out, put those to one side. Okay, then we'll probably find that the steam valve doesn't come off at all. You may be able to move it very slightly and move it left to right. At this point you might want to remove the nut on the wand completely, and you should at this point, now the pressure's taken off it, you should be able to just remove those fairly quickly and easily by hand. So that should just come off by hand. You may now find that you can just move that valve very slightly left and right, but you possibly can't get it out of the machine. It possibly won't just lift straight upwards. So the trick that we normally use is to jam something, normally a flat screwdriver, underneath the valve, between the valve and the boiler, and whilst twisting the screwdriver to get a bit of leverage and try and push the base of the valve off here, the easiest thing to do is just to wiggle and it might only be a little bit, but just wiggle the valve gently left and right, whilst at the same time turning the screwdriver. this valve has been on and off quite a few times during our testing, so it's an awful lot easier to get off than most will that have been on there for a while. But twisting the screwdriver whilst moving the valve, even just jiggling it from side to side very slightly whilst turning the screwdriver, and you should eventually find that becomes looser and looser, and with a little bit of effort and a little bit of time you should find that eventually it frees enough to come off completely, he says. There we go. So once it's off, you should then be able to remove the plastic splash guard or protection guard. You can put that to one side, and you'll also probably find that within your valve there is a black rubber O-ring that's been squashed pretty much as flat as a pancake due to the pressure and the heat. So make sure the rubber valve or rubber washer O-ring comes off with the valve, and you haven't left parts of the rubber O-ring within the valve seat. So that's the valve that we've taken off. And what we're going to do now is replace it with a nice brand new Shades of Coffee valve. These come fitted with a silicone O-ring, so this should last longer and it should fit better. And you'll also notice that on the Shades valve there is a shorter stem actually on the valve itself that protrudes into the boiler. There's no real reason for Gaggia to have this longer stem, so we elected to shorten it. So what we can do now is just gently place the valve back into place. Now there's a couple of things that are good to do before you actually put the valve back in place and start screwing it on. Firstly, if you've 3D printed or bought one of our protection rings, then again, in the same way that you do with the original one, you can push that back onto our Shades of Coffee one, and that just goes over the nut like that. Secondly, it's a good idea to at least finger tighten the steam wand back onto the valve before you finally fit it. So lower the valve back into place, get it roughly in the location where it needs to be, and then once it's roughly there, you'll find that you can locate the valve and the steam wand. You can push the one into the other. It can take a little bit of effort getting the two to marry up, because they do have to be fairly well aligned for them to slide into place. But when you get it in exactly the right place, you should then find that it's relatively easy to screw the nut back onto the valve. So the trick really is, if you find that there's any real effort involved in screwing the nut onto the valve, so we can do that literally by finger tight, pushing it around with a finger. If there's any real effort involved in doing that, if you find you need any sort of tools in order to be able to get the nut onto the port on the valve, then something is probably wrong and you probably haven't got something in the right place. So, and at least initially, finger tighten that so that you've got the wand located on the valve and everything is pretty much in the right location. Now we can, making sure that the valve is located in the right place and we haven't got any wires or anything trapped underneath the valve or between the valve and the boiler, we can position the screws back in that we removed in the first place. So we can use these same screws again, and with the screws we can just gently put a few turns on them. Now we want to just put a few turns on because we really want to be able to keep it so the valve moves a little bit, because at this stage what we need to be able to do is test fit the knob, and we'll usually find that in the natural resting position of the valve, you'll probably find that the knob fouls on the case in one way or another, and it's probably being pushed there by the pressure in the steam wand. So what we need to do is just make sure that when we tighten everything up, the valve is in the right place and the knob is in the right place so that it's not going to foul on the case. Normally that means that we end up pushing the knob as far as we possibly can towards the back of the machine. So push the valve as far as you can towards the back of the machine, usually, and then start to tighten these two screws in the top. You tighten the screws, that should lock the valve in place. And we should find now that the valve is tightly in place, and when we rotate the knob doesn't foul on anything and it rotates perfectly naturally. So the knob's rotating perfectly normally, the valve's in the right place, the knob's in the right place. The only thing we need to do now is, we previously tightened this finger tight, so what we need to do now is just put probably about a turn, no, half a turn or even a quarter of a turn with our wrench, just to tighten up that nut there. And then once we've done that, we should find that we are good to go and ready to test. So that's a very quick, simple video showing how to fit the new Shades of Coffee steam valve. As I said, doing it on this machine was perhaps a little bit easier than you'll find, mainly because of the fact that getting the original steam valve off can be a little tricky, can take some leverage, can take some swearing and some wiggling around and leverage before it actually comes off. But hopefully that helps.